And again, one of the reasons which caused this was that during World War II, large numbers of women were forced to go to the factories to produce the airplanes and the tanks and so forth, because large numbers of men were conscripted. And then what happened was that after World War II, when it was over, a lot of these women were then forced to leave the workplace to allow for the returning men from war to have jobs. And so these notions start to become. And so therefore what we find today is that we find that, feminism is not just a call to just that women are given, treated very fairly and given, recognize their essential humanity and so forth, but rather we find that, feminism has grown to a whole school of thought. Indeed, there are a number of schools of thought within feminism. There's a liberal feminism, there is a Marxist feminism, there's a radical feminism as another school of thought. Also, there is a psychoanalytic analytic feminism, a socialist feminism, an existential feminism, a postmodern feminism. Schools and schools of thoughts, within this. And if you look at the feminist approach to religion, basically you find two approaches today in the West. One approach might be considered the apologetic approach. And you find this often amongst Christian feminists, and to some degree among Jewish feminists also. These people try to reconcile the religious beliefs with feminism. And in order to achieve this, they argue that it's necessary that they have to reinterpret their text, whether the Hebrew text in the Old Testament or the Greek text in the New Testament. They have to reinterpret it, taking into consideration the historical, grammatical, and literary context which these texts were written in. And so therefore, one very famous book of this type is a book by a lady called Virginia Mollenkott. She authored a book called Women, Men, and the Bible, where she argues this type of argument. And this, of course, is a minority view, that tries to reconcile religious teachings with feminist thought. The other type of thought here we might, as opposed to the apologetic thought, is the radical feminist thought, you might call it. And, over here they consider that religion in its nature and in its essence is against women. And so therefore no religion, irrespective of what the religion, is positive for women, and that women must, just reject, in order to be free, they must reject religion as a whole. For instance, one British author by the name of Rosalind Miles, in her book The Women's History of the World, writes regarding, for instance, the notion that, or the belief that, in Adam and Eve, which is shared in its basic fundamentals by Christians and by Jews, Christians, and Muslims. You find both in Islam and also you find in Judaism and Christianity. The basic idea that Allah created Adam and then created Eve from the rib of Adam, and from the two, humanity spread, and that they were originally in paradise and then they sinned and they came to earth. In terms of the very basic details, there was an agreement. Obviously, there is additions and corruptions in the beliefs of the Jews and the Christians due to the loss of the purity of their texts. And while we have greater detail and we have a preserved text with the Muslims, but the point is that in terms of the general issues, the general beliefs, they're in agreement. So this author, Rosalind Miles, in The Women's History of the World, she writes that regarding the belief regarding Adam and Eve, she says, she calls it a myth, and she says the Adam and Eve myth is possibly the single most effective piece of enemy propaganda, meaning by enemy male propaganda, in the long history of the sex war, and also has other crucial implications. It performed the essential task of putting man first in the scheme of things, for in all the father God religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, God creates man first and woman is born after man. And then she goes on saying that attacking this in details really doesn't concern us now. But the point is, which I want to bring out, was that that she considered just the basic notion, which is a basic religious tenet for Muslims and also the other originally revealed scriptures of Jews and Christians, that that Allah created Adam and Eve. She considers this to be a myth, that it's a piece of enemy propaganda, that there's actually a sex war between the two sexes, and it has a crucial implications. And so therefore, for this reason, you find that the radical feminists, in order to sort of fulfill the natural need that human beings have to worship, they have tried to revive the worship of, female pagan deities. And for those of you who might have some sort of, readings in these books, you find that they try to, talk about the importance of reviving these female deities. And so therefore, the same author, Rosalind Miles, she looks at the coming of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ as a struggle between a male god, Allah, and the female god, Uzza. Now, of course, we know from our basics of Tawheed that Allah Azza wa Jalla is the creator of human beings, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not a man nor a woman, but rather He is the creator of men and women, and He is not like His creatures. But the point is, in fact, she thinks of the whole appearance of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ that it was a struggle between two of the women of Mecca, Khadija and Hind, and they were struggling for power in Mecca, and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, utilized that struggle when Khadija died in order to turn the tables upon women as a whole in Arabia and put forward a male god by the name of Allah and destroy the female goddesses. And so therefore one of the things that she calls for is the revival of the worship of these pagan idols. And this is nothing unique to her. You find this also amongst other writings. For instance, a book entitled Sisterhood is Global, the International Women's Movement Anthology, which was edited by Robin Morgan. Also in the section of Saudi Arabia and in Kuwait, they call for the women there to revive the worship of Al-Uzza and also to revive the worship of the other female idols that the pagan Arabs had. And in case, just to remind ourselves, the reason why I say female pagan idols, because the pagan Arabs used to think that Allah, the jinns were born from, or the angels were born from Allah and the jinns, and so therefore they described them as being the daughters of Allah, and they worshipped them, some certain sections of the pagan Arabs. Likewise, you find among women who attribute themselves to Islam, like Layla Ahmed, who wrote a book called Women and Gender in Islam, The Historical Roots of a Modern Debate. She becomes of great praise of the Sufi Ibn Arabi, and she feels that really that Ibn Arabi's teachings should be revived, and she calls for that. The reason why is because Ibn Arabi was among those Sufis who believed that everything was Allah. What's known as pantheism or monism. They believe that everything is Allah. So everybody is Allah. All things that we see, a person's shoes, a pen, a glass of water, everything is just a manifestation of a single existence which is identified by Allah. And so therefore, to them, Allah is both male and female. So she finds in this some sort of, a pleasure, and so therefore she calls that this. She says, to quote her, that on page 100, the notion of divinity in the female face was profoundly offensive to the orthodox, meaning to the regular Muslims. Ibn Arabi's emphasis on the female dimension of the divine and the complementary of the sexes was a consistent element in his thought. And then she says, concludes by saying, although a controversial figure, one subject to hostility during periods of his life, his intellectual power, as evidenced in his prodigious literature, has won him acknowledgement as a major Muslim thinker. So the point is that this movement, which grew in the West and has developed now into many different philosophical schools of thought, now basically has two positions toward religion. You have those who are apologetic, like the Christian feminists, and also the radical feminists, which is probably the majority of the feminist movement today, who look at religion as something which is inherently evil against women, and that women should disbelieve and reject their religions, and that they should return to the worship of pagan idols, and turn to things like witchcraft and all these sort of fads which are New Age religions which are dominant in the West. And one finds that there was a very lengthy article that appeared in one magazine called maybe it was the American Spectator. I'm not certain the name of the magazine at this point, but it appeared in 1992, which was entitled "Feminism, Spiritualism, and a New Craze: The Twilight of the Goddess." And basically, it talks about this idea and how people are trying to push this in the West and trying to really reinterpret history for that.